This is FE Peer Review. The date was March the 7th, 2025 when I started this, but I put my first draft aside and started over, and I'm not going to bother changing the date on the title card, so it's now March the 8th. Kyle Adams has it wrong about Jaren, the final experiment, and spreads deception with half-truths. Creaky Blinder put out a little video in which he was reviewing a video of Kyle in which Kyle was talking about Jaren. So now I'm going to talk about, well, I won't talk about Creaky much, just to say that he's as sarcastic and funny and on point as always. So do check out his video if you haven't. You'll find a link in the description. I'll reserve what I have to say primarily about Kyle. Kyle is discussing the issue of Jaren having come to his senses and accepted evidence even when that evidence conflicts with his deeply held misconceptions and delusions. This is Kyle's video. There will be a link in the description. I'm going to read a comment that I left on it down here at the bottom at the 120 mark. Kyle resorts to a half-truth regarding right to left. Let me explain that. We'll go and take a look at Kyle's video, a little piece of it. I'm going to keep the volume off and I'll just narrate what's going on. Kyle's in his living room or family room at home. He's got a laser pointer and he's standing on one side of the room and he's pointing the laser at the fireplace. He's going to watch that laser. He's going to raise the laser and go up and over the ceiling and back down the other wall, remarking whether he's going right to left or left to right in doing that. So we see the laser there. He goes up, he goes across, he's going from left to right, and he goes down the other wall. All very good. Now he's going to move around to the other side of the room, move across to the other side of the room, and he's going to do the same thing. Same start, same end point, and he's going from right to left. So that is his argument as to why you can see the sun rotating clockwise in one hemisphere and counterclockwise in the other hemisphere. Interesting point to note there, I was using the word hemispheres, but actually, if you were imagining a line drawn down the middle of his room, that line would be the equator. So when he's standing in the first position, he's looking south. Let's suppose the first position is the northern hemisphere, above the equator. His first position is north of the equator. He's looking south. He does the movement of the sun. Now he moves to a position south of the equator, turns around 180 degrees, and looks at the position of the sun. And yeah, one side goes from right to left, the other goes from left to right. So back to my comment. It was made explicitly clear from the start, months before the TFE trip, when people first started talking about it. The issue wasn't just the 24-hour sun above the horizon. It was that, in combination with the sun doing a full 360-degree rotation around the observers in Antarctica. Emphasis. We even had one of those clips, if I remember correctly, it was David Weiss, saying that this 360 rotation was impossible on a flat Earth. That rotation is what cannot be reconciled with any flat Earth map that I know of. That is what seems to be geometrically impossible on a flat Earth. And it doesn't really matter what the sun is. It could be a ball of unicorn snot magically drifting on wind currents. Yes, I was feeling a bit sarcastic when I wrote this. So long as we're all seeing the same ball of snot, it can't be seen doing the full 360 in Antarctica and also do what we see it doing in the rest of the world at the same time. I touched on this briefly in my video of 2 months back. Let me bring that image up. Here's a little snippet from my video here, a screenshot. It was called The Final Thoughts on the Final Experiment. It starts around the 420 mark. I'm sure that if Kyle looked at that, he would say that he doesn't yet have a flat Earth solution for that problem because he doesn't yet have a flat Earth model. So I won't hold my breath. But that said, I do invite Kyle to start working on a solution, the most obvious being a flat Earth map that actually works, that is to scale and can provide accurate distances and bearings between any 2 points on the ground or water. No need to discuss the sky if he's worried about discussing the shape of the ground and the sky, which is the next point we're going to come to. And that This map also does, though, need to avoid conflicts with what we undeniably do see in the sky. Now, in my map from my earlier video, I showed the Gleason map here, but I've looked at a bunch of flat maps of the Earth. And as some of you know, I've done a whole series of videos on flat map projections of the Earth. There isn't a single one of them that I can find where you can reconcile the geometry of these observations with a flat map. So what we have is Union Glacier down at the bottom. That little red X there, that little red cross, that's Union Glacier Camp. And when the folks from TFE were down at Union Glacier, they saw the sun doing a counterclockwise rotation around their observation location. At that very same day, 24-hour sunshine, at that very same day, at the Davis Camp in Antarctica and at the McMurdo Camp in Antarctica, the people in those locations were seeing the same thing. They were seeing 24-hour sunlight, and they were seeing the sun do a full 360 around their location. However, folks in the Northern Hemisphere, not inside the Arctic, of course, just up there where you could actually see the sun in winter, they were seeing the sun going clockwise around them. So while in one part of the world they were seeing a counterclockwise movement, at the very same time, folks in the other part of the world were seeing a clockwise movement. Kyle's little demonstration where he turns around, and looks in the opposite direction does not model what we see on this map, or if you try to reproduce this concept on any other flat Earth map. His little charade in his living room there does not model this. These people, let's put it another way. Instead of turning around and standing still and looking at what the sun does, stand in a fixed location, Kyle. Listen close, Kyle. Stand in a fixed spot and look in the direction of the sun. Of course, don't look straight at it. And as the sun moves, you move with it so that you're always facing the sun. If you were down at Union Glacier, you would have been rotating around yourself counterclockwise. If you were in your living room at your house in the United States, you'd have been rotating around yourself clockwise. Those two people in those two locations would have been doing that same thing at the same time. That, Kyle, is what was happening, and that is not what you modeled when you walked from one side of your room to the other, turning around at the equivalent of the equator, turning around and looking in the opposite direction. So, Kyle, I hope anybody, I know this isn't going to make a single bit of difference to you because you're happy to go right on spreading your delusions with your half-truths and your lies. But I'm hoping that somebody who listens to you and gets confused by what you're saying and gets worried and thinks maybe this guy's smarter than me will look at this map, will listen to what I'm saying, and realize you got your guy down at Union Glacier, he's turning counterclockwise. You've got your guy up in the United States, he's turning clockwise. They're both looking at the same sun at the same time, and it's going in two different directions. That doesn't work on any flat Earth map I've ever seen. Okay, that was the short version of this little paragraph here. Real answers rooted in the reality of physical observations of our very real planet. Answers that work in reality here. That is what Kyle is not offering. Let's move on to my second little comment here. Top of the page, top of the screen. Remember those sphere-shaped paper lampshades that were popular in the 70s and the 80s? Of course, Kyle wouldn't remember those from back then. Imagine one of those hanging in the middle of a room. Some little critter, let's say a fly, is wandering around on top of it. Here's our lampshade, and our little fly is up here. When it's up at the top, it can see the ceiling. And when it goes down to the bottom, it can see the floor. At 6:42 in Kyle's video, he says, "The things I see in the sky do not determine the shape of the ground I walk on." That's his way of dismissing, when convenient, any observation that has to do with seeing things in the sky. Now, Nathan Oakley came up with this a couple of years ago. I don't know for certain that he was the originator, but I'd never heard anybody use that excuse to brush aside mountains of evidence. But once Nathan did, I was amazed at how quickly a bunch of other people lined up behind him and happily started parroting it too. And here's Kyle parroting it as well. I'm sure that gives Nathan Oakley a real sense of pleasure to know that he's got such a grip on the minds of so many people. The things I see in the sky do not determine the shape of the ground I walk on. Well, it just clicked in my mind what's wrong with this sentence. It's twisted around backwards on 2 points. First, the shape of the ground I walk on determines what I can see in the sky. Just like the fly on the lampshade, you see, it's the reverse from what Kyle said. Second, it's not about what we see in the sky determining the shape of the ground. The shape of the ground is just simply what it is. Other forces determine the shape. Geological forces, gravity, water eroding ground surface. These are the forces that shape the ground we walk on. And I mentioned gravity. Now, there's a certain amount of overlap because everything in the universe is subject to the same laws of physics. So gravity on Earth, which shapes Earth, is also, determining the orbits of the planets and so forth. So I don't want to get into nitpicking about all that. But my point is, it's not about what we see in the sky determining the shape of the ground. That doesn't determine the shape of the ground. Gravity primarily determines the shape of the ground. That fly walking around on that lampshade first sees the ceiling. Then as he walks around, one or more walls as he wanders down. And then it sees the floor. He sees the floor. If he keeps walking, he will eventually see the ceiling again. So, what that fly sees is determined by the shape of the object it walks on. When he's up here, he can't see the floor. When he's up here, he can't see the southern constellations. Now, Kyle was talking about doing some demonstration, or rather copying a piece of video from someone else who did some demonstration where they were shining a light into a fish tank and getting the reflection to rotate in the opposite direction. And this was magically explaining the two celestial poles and how the stars rotate in one direction north of the equator, and there's another celestial pole south of the equator. And the big problem there is that it doesn't account for the fact that we see an entirely different display of stars, north or south. We're not seeing the same stars south of the equator simply rotating the other way. We are seeing an entirely different set of constellations. Kyle, that's something you don't dare discuss, because it definitely destroyed the argument you tried to make in your video. I guess that's about it. It's just more of Kyle using half-truths and lies to spread his delusion. I know the large majority of my viewers are all entirely on board with this, but if some of you watching this came by chance from Kyle's videos and are curious about some of these phenomena and want to discuss it more, please leave a comment, ask questions, explain what's on your mind. I'll be happy to go into these points deeper if you need me to. Just please ask questions. Be a little bit skeptical of what Kyle's saying. Don't take it all at face value. And with that, I'll just say thank you very much for watching. Please leave a comment. Click the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't. And have a great day.